Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, CAB workshop, today's CAB workshop on creating engaging CAB meeting agendas. So a little bit of housekeeping. We're recording this session. We'll send it to you afterwards. If you have any questions, type them in the Q&A box and we'll answer along the way and also at the end of the session. So quickly for today's agenda, my name is Tatiana Falcone, and I'm joined by my colleague Nancy Trachtenberg, and you'll hear from her shortly. She's going to cover the agenda creation process, CAB meeting rules, session design and formats, and then how to best prepare for the meeting. And we'll wrap up with Q&A and resources at the end. Quickly about Ignite, and if you've joined us for other webinars, you've heard this, but we're the only global firm dedicated to customer advisory boards and partner advisory boards. We've completed over 300 advisory board engagements, and many B2B companies use the industry best practices we've developed for managing CABs. So we can help you create a board and manage the board. We can also help you optimize a board and assess your existing programs and make recommendations. And you can hire Ignite as a facilitator for virtual and in-person advisory board meetings. So I'm gonna hand it over to Nancy. Go ahead.
Thanks, Tatiana. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. I'm Nancy Trachtenberg, Senior Consultant and Facilitator at Ignite. I'm going to walk through Ignite's methodology and approach for creating compelling agendas for your advisory board meetings. I'm going to begin with, I'm trying to advance the slides. There we go. I'm going to begin with our overall methodology, Ignite's methodology for agenda creation and how it can enable the power to convene, and that is to assemble the members of the advisory board. We recommend beginning with a theme that reflects the journey or transformation that your company will go on with your clients. The theme is compelling and unique to your company. For ideas, you can start with a tagline or your company's tagline or mission statement, and then also discuss potential themes with your head of marketing, head of strategy. But the overall theme for your CAB is what is sort of the North Star for developing topic ideas for the agendas. If you already have a CAB in progress, CAB launched, and I know that about half of you on today's call already have an advisory board in place. You may already have established a theme up front when you launched your board, but if not, we recommend that you create one as sort of the foundation for going forward. So just a couple examples could be if you're, for example, a cybersecurity company, your theme might be shaping the future of next generation endpoint security. If you were a fleet management company, it could be something like enabling transportation safety, or a software company might have something like enabling technology-driven transformation. So those are just some ideas for your theme. From there, you're going to start to gather topic ideas from your internal stakeholders and then create what we call a discussion guide of 6 or 7 of those topics that your stakeholders have recommended. And I'm going to walk through each of these in a little bit more detail, each of these steps. Then you're going to, using the discussion guide, interview your members. We conduct 30-minute calls with each of the members to get their perspective on what's relevant and top of mind for them. And then we create a summary, an analysis of what we heard during all the interviews. And that's what then informs the agenda for the meeting. So we'll produce an executive summary, review it with the executive stakeholders, and then use that as a starting point for the agenda. Let me talk then a little bit more about each of these steps along the way. So as you're gathering topics from your internal stakeholders, you want to make sure that you're identifying topics that are beneficial to both you and the CAB members. And the topics can come from challenges, insights, priorities, trends. When I'm interviewing stakeholders, I generally start with what is it you want to learn from the advisory board members? Where are you looking for feedback to inform your priorities, your investments, big bets that you need to make? And each stakeholder generally comes up with 2 or 3 topic areas where they're looking for feedback. And so we'll take all of those recommendations and come up with about 6 or 7 for creating a discussion guide. So this is an example discussion guide. You can see there's 3 parts to it. The first is just to gather some background from the members when we interview them on just key priorities and initiatives over the next year or 2. And then the specific topics, feedback on the specific topics, which we've talked to the executive, which we gathered from the executive stakeholders. And then we always leave time at the end for anything else that they might want to propose. But you can see from here, we recommend 6 to 7 topics on the discussion guide. And for each topic, a couple sub-bullets that give a flavor for what a description of the topic, or a couple questions where you can start to probe to get some feedback, initial feedback. You're not trying to conduct an actual advisory board meeting and drill down and get a lot of feedback, but you're just trying to get a flavor, a sense of where their challenges are around a particular topic, why they prioritized it for the agenda, what they want to discuss with their peers and with the host company, and then maybe start to gather a little bit of intel about where they're at with the particular topic.
Oh, Nancy, I'm gonna pause you for a moment here. We've got some questions coming in.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Tatiana. What's the first question?
So there's 2 questions here about the agenda creation process, and how long do you spend on determining the agenda? Seems like it would take months. And then a related question, how far in advance of the CAB meeting would you conduct the board member interviews?
Okay, great. Those are great questions. Thank you, Tatiana. So the agenda creation process takes about 2 months. We like to have at least 2 months from the time we have a draft agenda to go through the iterations, identify the session owners, do all the prep sessions with the session owners and all the content reviews. That takes a minimum of 2 months. So, excuse me, we would conduct the interviews then at least 3, if not 4 months in advance of having a draft agenda, because it takes time. Excuse me, it takes time to get to all of the members and conduct the interviews, write up the analysis, review it with the stakeholders. So if you could give yourself as much runway as possible, as I said, at least 3 months, 4 if possible.
Okay, thanks.
And Tatiana, there we go. So just a little bit more about the interviews to summarize. So as I said, we'll take about the first 5 minutes just to gather some high-level background. I usually say to the member, let's take a minute to just 5 minutes max, just 30,000-foot view, what are some key initiatives and priorities where you're focused in your organization as it pertains to whatever, if it's you're talking to a CIO or if you're talking to a CFO. So, as it pertains to whatever the subject matter is. And then I'll ask them from the list of 6 or 7 topics. I'll say the host company proposed 6 or 7 topics for the agenda. Please tell me which 3 look most relevant to you. And then I'll spend 6 or 7 minutes talking to them about the topic. And as I said a few minutes ago, why did they pick it? Why is it important to them? What are the challenges that they have specific to that topic? What is it that they want to learn? And then I'll always save a few minutes at the very end of the 30 minutes to ask them, is there anything else, anything that they'd like to propose that wasn't on the list, something that they expected to be on the list that's not there? And sometimes a few members, after I've done a dozen or so interviews, there could be a topic that does kind of bubble up that wasn't on the list, but generally the agendas end up being 3 or 4 of the topics from the list that the host company proposed. So as I said, we conduct all of the interviews. I try to do at least a dozen or so 30-minute calls with each of the members, and then we summarize. I'll do an individual call report for each interview, and then a 3-page executive summary of the key themes, and then that's what feeds the initial proposed agenda, which we'll review with the executive stakeholders.
Oh, Nancy, we've got some more questions.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
So this is a good one. I've often run into roadblocks with trying to get topics or the agenda topics set up so far in advance because those executive stakeholders feel their priorities might change as we get closer to the CAB meeting. Any tips?
Sure. So I guess a couple points. First of all, sometimes it's helpful to, rather than starting with a blank slate, to come in with a proposal. So for me, if I'm meeting with the stakeholders ahead of time, I'll do some research on the company. I probably already know something about the company, but I'll do some additional research. I'll research the industry, and I'll come up with a list of a few ideas as a starting point for them to react to. But then to the point around priorities changing and things changing, it certainly does happen. And that's why the agenda, I keep saying that it's an initial agenda because sometimes we go through several iterations of the agenda before it's locked. And to some extent, you do need to be a little bit flexible. Things do change, new executives step in and have a different perspective. And so there's always a little bit of flexibility and, change that can happen, but we roll with the punches. I hope that helps. Tatiana, was there another question?
Yeah, there's some more questions about the interviews. So
Okay, sure.
let me ask you. Do you have suggestions to keep member interviews on topic? Ours tend to get away from us.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have to say I've done hundreds, if not thousands, of these member interviews, and I'm always watching the time, and I'm able to almost always keep them to 30 minutes. And one of the things that I'll do if a member, customer, or client is rather verbose and carrying on about a particular topic, which is all fantastic, and we don't want to cut them off, but sometimes I'll just jump in and say, look, this is so valuable and great feedback, but I'm looking at the clock and I want to be mindful of your calendar. And I suggest, in the interest of time, that we move on to the next topic that you said was interesting. So I will move them along as needed to make sure that we don't run over the 30 minutes. I'm always very mindful and respectful of their calendars and not taking up any more time than we allocated for the interview.
Thank you. Really great tips there. So there's 2 more questions here. Does Ignite conduct discussions without the host company, and would Ignite need subject matter expertise? And where do they get that from for discussions with clients? Very good question.
So let me take the host company question. So it can go either way. Across my clients, I would say half of them want me to just do the interviews on my own and write them up and read out to them what came from the interviews. And the other half want at least someone from their team, a stakeholder or the program manager, to join in and listen in. They're 99% of the time in listen only mode, and I'm running the call. I personally think it's great if someone from the host company joins because, well, I write everything up. There's no substitute for hearing a conversation firsthand. So I think it's great when someone from the host company joins in and listens in. That's great. And as far as being a subject matter expert, most of our boards are strategic and C-level, many of them, not all of them, but the conversations are very strategic. We're not in the weeds. I don't need to understand the architecture of a particular platform or the bits and bytes about anything. It's generally much more strategic about prioritization of investments, value, risk, desired outcomes. These are strategic topics, and at Ignite, we work with so many different clients across so many different industries that after time, really, we know enough to conduct these interviews and the right questions to ask to get the information that we need to understand what's relevant for them. We're very rarely need to be a subject matter expert because we're not getting into that level of detail.
Okay, great, Nancy. There's a related question here. What are the benefits to have a third party interviewing board members?
That's a great question too. I find that the clients can be a little more open and share some things with a third party that they may not share with the host company. When I produce the executive summaries and the meeting reports, a lot of times my clients will say their feedback is that, wow, there was a lot of great insight there. It was very insightful, because I think they share things that they're just more comfortable sharing things with a third party than with the client directly. And it's not that they're complaining about things, or they're never like whining sessions, so to speak, but they're just maybe a little bit more open with a third party.
Okay,
I hope that helps.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to pivot a little bit around. So now you've got your draft, you've got sort of the prioritization of your topics, and now you're going to put it all together into an agenda. So a few tips to keep in mind as you craft the agenda. Ideal agenda flows are 1 to 1.5 days. All of our meetings are advisory board meetings, or most of them are 1 day, some are 1.5. Always be sure to allow 30-minute breaks, a 30-minute break in the morning, a 30-minute break in the afternoon, and then an hour for lunch, and then a good break between the end of the day and dinner, if that's your meeting format. And be sure to include some kind of social network gathering, even if it's just a cocktail hour before you sit down for dinner. But one of the things we hear over and over from advisory board members is that a lot of the value is the peer networking. They really value that, the opportunity, the extra time to just chat with someone about best practices or challenges over coffee or lunch, etc. So it's really important to build in those break times. Over on the right-hand side of this slide, in terms of content and topics, we say that less is more. So if you have a 1-day agenda, we would never build in anything more than 4 or 5 topics. No discussion topic is less than an hour. So if you only allocate 30 minutes or 45 minutes to an agenda topic, that's fine if it's a presentation, but these are advisory boards. And so to make it advisory, you want to make sure there's a high level of engagement and interaction and lots of discussion. And any discussion or question that you pose to the members to start to get feedback could easily take 10, 15 minutes. So if you want to ask 4 or 5 questions, you easily need an hour. Most of our sessions are closer to 75 minutes or even 90 minutes if you have an exercise included in the session. So discussion topics, not presentation. We don't want to have too many PowerPoint slides, just enough PowerPoint to set up the context for a discussion or showcase your company's thought leadership or perspective or expertise in a particular area, but just enough content to set up the discussion. We call the owner of each session, a session leader, not a presenter, to help advance, promote this shift in mindset that we're not presenting, we're leading discussions, and encourage interaction early. We always say, no one should be talking for more than 6 or 7 minutes without opening it up for discussion. So we never want someone to present for 75 minutes and save the last 15 for discussion questions. It should be interactive as early in the session as possible. Here are a few examples of what an agenda could actually look like. This is a 1.5-day agenda. So you would start in the evening with an informal welcome reception, not a plated seated dinner, but just a chance for everyone to mingle and familiarize themselves with all the meeting attendees. And then you'd start up day 1 over on the left-hand side of this slide with welcome and intros, review the agenda, review the facilitation guidelines for all the attendees. And then this portfolio vision, usually the meetings start with the most senior level person providing some kind of strategic updates to the company's vision. This session can be more shorter and might just be like 20 minutes or so to just set the stage for the rest of the meeting. And then you would have a break and then start with your sessions. And this example here has innovation, external speaker, program optimization, and a session on blockchain, and then wrapping up before dinner. One point about the external speaker, we at Ignite don't necessarily recommend that you should have an external speaker, because we really want the focus of your advisory board to be more about getting advice and guidance from your clients about your company's portfolio, strategy, vision, etc. However, sometimes it can be viewed as a perk to the members to have an external speaker, and it also could be very relevant. So if you have a meeting of CFOs, perhaps bringing in a chief economist could be highly relevant for the members and also to the agenda. So as long as it's tied to the agenda, it can make sense. And if you can get someone, a recognizable name, an author, that can be a draw for the members. So this 1.5-day format, then on day 2, you would just have a couple sessions, wrap up with meeting feedback, and then lunch and departures. That's a 1.5-day agenda. Most of my clients do a 1-day agenda, especially the more senior level boards. If it's CIOs, CTOs, CEOs, they're busy people, obviously, and it's a gift. If they'll invest a day and a half is really pushing it. So a day agenda would be bring them in for a welcome reception and dinner the night before. And the next day have a meeting from say 8 to 4. It would be the same start with welcome, introductions, company vision update, and then 4-ish topics, and with good breaks, and then wrap up by about 4 o'clock, which allows people to still get home that same day, depending on where your meeting is and where they're headed back to. One last example is it's a 1-day agenda, but it's broken up over 2 days. We see some clients do this. Basically, it's the same flow and structure, but you're starting with day 1, you might start with lunch and go from like 12 to 4 and then do a dinner, and then start up the next day from 8 to 12 or 8 to 2, maybe at the very latest. So I want to drill down a little bit more on the beginning of the meetings, and because we follow the same structure, if you will, at the top of each meeting before the meeting break. So you're going to start with your executive sponsor providing a welcome and talking about the meeting objectives. If it's the first meeting, they might be talking about the CAB objectives. Then as the facilitator, if I were the facilitator, I would then review the facilitation guidelines with some tips for all the attendees. One of the things we always tell people is that at Ignite, we try to follow the 80-20 rule, which is we always want the members doing 80% of the talking and the host company doing 20%. And so we provide some tips for everyone to help us achieve that. And then we go through introductions and roundtable. We start with the members and give them each up to about 2 minutes and ask them to introduce themselves, of course, name and role and company. But then we like to ask some kind of icebreaker question. What's what's your #1 initiative over the next year? What's your #1 challenge over the next year? And then we would be in the front of the room with a flip chart just a bullet or two from each member's response and display that up in the front of the room. But it's a great way to give the members the floor right at the top of the meeting, hear a little bit from everyone, and it's a great icebreaker because then when you go to that morning break, the members have already had a chance to hear something from the other members and start to make connections based on what folks shared. And then from there, I'll go back around the room and ask the host company attendees to introduce themselves. And very quickly, they don't need to answer the question. They are just going to say their name and role at the host company. So this is really for the members so everyone can get to know them a little bit more. And then finally, just a little about an agenda for a virtual meeting. We recommend keeping virtual meetings at 2 hours. I know the last couple of years during the pandemic, many companies were doing longer virtuals and trying to include some social activity, tasting of some sort, cheese tasting or some kind of game. But now everyone's very busy, and I just find anything more than 2 hours, people start dropping off. And it's hard to keep people engaged for more than 2 hours. And if you do anything more than 2 hours, then you have to include a break. So we highly recommend keeping your virtuals to 2 hours, but it's the same format, just a little bit faster pace. So you've got your welcome, agenda review, etc. If there are any new members, because if this is a virtual, it's most likely not your first meeting. And so the members will already know each other, but you might have some new members. So you'll give those folks an opportunity to introduce themselves. Your executive sponsor might do a quick progress update on things that have been discussed at prior meetings and any progress the host company's made against those. And then you can have a couple topics like 45, 50 minutes each, and then wrap up. I'm going to segue now to CAB meeting roles. So we are asked often who from those companies should be at the meeting. So of course, your executive sponsor, your board should absolutely have an executive sponsor. This is the person who is the spokesperson for your overall advisory board. They chair the meeting, they provide the welcome and closing remarks. You're going to have a facilitator, either someone from your own company or an external facilitator or an Ignite facilitator, but you definitely want to have a facilitator who helps ensure that the meeting is run according to the agenda, everyone has their allotted time, and also that the members all have an opportunity to contribute to the discussion. And then you're going to have your session owners, and those are oftentimes executives. They may be a subject matter expert, but many companies, because these conversations, again, as I've been saying, are strategic and at a fairly high altitude, and we're, unless it's a product board, then you may have subject matter experts, but for strategic boards, it's usually the executives who lead the discussions. And then you're going to have someone who's capturing notes of them for the meeting. A lot of times it's just a running transcript of the we don't record meetings for privacy reasons, and because we want the members to feel that it's a safe environment for open and candid discussion. But if there's someone who's just kind of capturing a transcript, then you can go back and review that to create the meeting report, which we do at Ignite always create after a meeting. The roles for a virtual cab are the same, but you might need a couple extra people. So if you're on the Zoom platform, for example, you might want a program manager to help launch the Zoom and let people into the meeting, mute people, etc. You might want someone who can advance the slides. So you might need a couple extra support people, but otherwise the roles are the same. You've got your executive sponsor, your facilitator, a note taker, and your session owners. So we get asked this question all the time: how many host company attendees should be at the meeting? As a best practice, we say the ratio is 2 to 1. You want to have one host company person for every 2 clients. If you have 12 clients at the meeting, and we say the magic number is somewhere between 12 and 15, that's the ideal number of clients at an advisory board meeting. So say you have 12 members at your meeting, your host company attendees should really be limited to around 6 or 7. So you're going to have your executive sponsor, your session owners, and maybe one other person, but really try to limit it because you want this to be a meeting for the members. You don't want it to feel like it's a company meeting. You don't want to dominate. And again, we always are looking to create an intimate environment for open and candid discussion. And if there are too many people from your company in the meeting, it will work against that. And some of the best practices along this too, as a kind of a way to guide it, is we say no spectators. Unless you have an active role in the meeting, you don't need to be there. You don't need to be there to listen. For Ignite meetings, we produce a comprehensive meeting report, and anyone with a need to know can read that report. You can do a debrief afterwards with internal people, share the meeting report, and brief them on the key themes from the discussions. But we don't need people just sitting there listening. And also no revolving doors. The members have made a commitment almost always to be in the meeting for its entirety. And out of respect, you want to make sure that your host company attendees stay in the meeting for its entirety. And also, oftentimes, the discussions bleed from one session to the next. And if you're a session owner and you're in and out of the meeting, you are not going to you may miss some context or some discussion that's relevant for your session. And so it's really important that the host company attendees stay in the meeting.
Oh, Nancy, there was a quick question there. Does that 2 to 1 ratio include the facilitator and the note taker?
Yes and no. So generally my meetings would be, say, 12 clients, 6 or 7 from the host company, myself, so the facilitator would be extra. And the note taker, depending, can be extra as well. So there may be a note taker in addition, as an additional person. I hope that answers that question. So generally the meetings turn out to be about 22, 25 people is the largest that you want the meeting to be. We seat the members in a U, and anything more than 25, just the U gets way too big and it's difficult to hear, it's difficult to see everyone. So 22, 25 people total, however that math turns out between executive sponsors, session owners, clients, and then a facilitator and a note taker. I'm going to now talk more about session design, and I talked about a while back around we recommend never having a session shorter than 1 hour, and that many of our sessions are 75 minutes to 90. So here's an example. If you had a 75-minute session, it would start off, the first 5 minutes would just be kind of level setting. Here's what this session is about. Here are my objectives for the session, and here's where I'll be asking for your feedback. And then you'd have about 65 minutes of content and discussion. Again, not a lot of content, just enough to set up the context. showcase your expertise in the area, showcase your thought leadership, provide your point of view, but just the context needed to then start asking for feedback. And then I always ask the session owners to take a couple minutes at the end to summarize with what were a couple things you heard that surprised you, that validated your thinking, that changed your thinking. What were some key points from the session? It's just a nice way to affirm that you heard the discussion. And it can be kind of hard to do in real time when you're leading a session, but I think it's a nice way to wrap up. As far as different ways to engage the members, of course, as you can just have discussion around the U, and generally 1 or 2 sessions will be just that, where the session owner is leading a discussion and there's just a discussion around the room. But to ensure a high level of energy and engagement and interaction, we recommend introducing different formats for the different sessions throughout the day and trying to mix it up as much as possible. So you can do prioritization exercises with sticky dots. You can do ideate with a wall of ideas. So you can give everyone Post-its and ask them to identify 3 ideal features for a future solution. You can break them up into pairs and ask them to work on best practices and then have them read out. Of course, you can do a round robin, go around the U. As I said, we do that with the introductions. So you could do it one more time, but I wouldn't do it any more than that, or it starts to feel a little stale, and it also can take a bit of time. We always recommend a member spotlight, or it's kind of like a mini case study that's tied to one of the topics. So if you have a 75-minute session, 15 minutes can be an opportunity for a member to share a mini case study of something that they're doing in that area. And it's really just, what was the problem or challenge we had? What was the solution we came up with? What have been the benefits? We always try to make it easy for them. Like, they don't have to have slides. They only need to talk for 5 minutes, but then there are usually a lot of questions from the other members. So we allocate about 15 minutes for a member spotlight. You can also do a panel discussion if you have 2 or 3 members who are advanced who are far along in a particular area. You can do a panel discussion with them, and then breakouts, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more, but breakouts is something that we always incorporate at least one into every agenda. And it's a way to get the members collaborating in small groups and rolling up their sleeves and solving a problem. And the members love this, especially for people who may not be quite as comfortable in the larger group. We find that in the small groups, everyone will engage. So a little bit more about breakouts. Not every topic lends itself to being a breakout. You need to think about it in terms of, does this topic lend itself in terms of, is there an exercise that I can ask the members to work on? What will the output be actionable? So we recommend doing like 3 questions. So it might be, if the topic was cybersecurity, it might be, what's your number 1 challenge with cyber? Question number 2 would be, what would an ideal solution look like? And question number 3 would be, how could the host company help you? And you give them about 30 minutes to work in these small teams, have them flip chart or write on a big Post-it their thoughts and feedback. But you basically want them, they're not getting together in small groups to just chat or talk about a particular topic. You really want them thinking through some specific questions and coming back with responses. We define the teams in advance. So we'll split the members up into different teams. You might want to group them by vertical, by size of company. A lot of times it can just be random. It really depends on the topic and your board. It might make sense to group them. Each group works on the same questions. And as I said, we pre-assign the members. We also pre-assign the member leads. So for each team, we'll pre-assign a member who will be responsible for coming back and doing the readout to the larger group. And we do all this in advance so that the members aren't taking time figuring out what group they want to be a part of or who's going to be the leader who comes back and does the readout. All of this is set in advance so that they can go to their teams and immediately start working on the questions. Let the members run the session. You can have someone from the host company in each of the breakouts to kind of help just in case they get stuck and have a question, or just to help keep them on track with the timing. But you want to it's a session for the members. You want to let the members run the session. You also can have other people from your host company just listening in, but they shouldn't be participating in the discussion. And then, as I said, that member lead is the person who comes back and does the readout. We just a couple other points. So if I'm doing breakouts, I'm likely to have the session for 90 minutes. You want to have a little bit of discussion up front about the topic. You don't want to just start a session and immediately send them off into breakout teams. So there's usually 30, 40 minutes of discussion about the topic, and then you're going to set up the breakouts, give them about 30 minutes to work in teams, and at least 15 minutes for the readouts. And we'll go around and ask each of the 3 member leads, if you had 3 teams, each of the member leads to do a readout, and then that can generate additional discussion as well. So it easily can take 45 minutes for a breakout. So you're talking about 75, 90 minutes easily for any session that includes a breakout. And then a couple other examples of things you can do beyond a breakout that I mentioned earlier, the environmental landscape. I oftentimes will do an environmental landscape early on in the meeting and put it up on a board, and like a foam board, and leave it at the front of the room so that everyone can see it. But on this one on the left, you can see we asked the members to identify which public cloud they're using. You can do over on the right, top right, a prioritization exercise with sticky dots. And then on the lower right, design thinking. This was a session where they had big foam boards and Post-its, and they were ideating in small teams. So it was a breakout, but it also was kind of an ideation session as well. Different questions for the breakout and a different format for them to work together. So these are all just examples of ways to get people out of their seats, collaborating, interacting, working together, keeping the energy level high, because you're not just spending 8 to 4 the day, from 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, sitting around a U and having discussions. You're introducing different formats for everyone. This is just a few ideas about some of the things that are needed for visualization, Post-its, chips, stickers, flip charts, whiteboards, etc. For an innovation session, you might do some brainstorming, design thinking, prioritization. You might do some sticky dots, currency stickers. And then, of course, if it's a virtual meeting, there are many different platforms for doing mobile surveys where you can see the results in real time and then have a discussion about the results that come back. And then finally, my last topic is about meeting preparation. And I'm going to go ahead and just click through this different sections here. So someone was asking early on, and we generally, the whole process, if we're launching a board for the first time with someone, the whole process is about 6 months. We like to have 6 months. We can do it in less time, but 6 months is good. I talked earlier about doing the interviews like 3 or 4 months before the meeting. But when you get down to the final 6 weeks, or which is on this chart, or 8 weeks, at about 8 weeks out from the meeting, 6 to 8 weeks out from the meeting, you should have already conducted one-on-one prep sessions with each of the session owners. So if you have 4 different sessions, you've had 2 or 3 prep sessions with each of those session owners to talk about what is it you want to learn from the members? How should we frame it up? How should it be facilitated? Should it be an exercise? Should it be breakout? Should it just be discussion? who's a member. That could be a member spotlight. And so after 2 or 3 sessions, they should have a draft that's about 75% solid. And then somewhere around 4 weeks before the meeting, we bring everyone together, all the session owners, the executive sponsor, anybody from the host company who'll be at the meeting, and do a quick review of everyone's session. Not their entire set of remarks, but just here's at a high level. I'll ask each session owner to just share at a high level what are the goals of your session, what are your key messages, and where are you looking for feedback. And when they come to this meeting, their content, as I said, should be about 75% final. There will definitely be a lot of feedback for the session owners in terms of how to adjust, possibly change some things. About 2 weeks later, we come back. This should be like 3 to 4 weeks before the meeting, come back and do a second content review with everyone. At this point, your content, the session owner's content, should be about 90% finalized. And then we may have a meeting like the week before to finalize everything, and then you have your on-site dry run. And that is the day before the meeting on site with everyone from the host company who will be at the meeting. And for that on-site dry run, what we do is we'll go through each of the members who will be attending, just anything that people should know in advance, an escalation, an opportunity. You just don't want your executives to be caught off guard during a coffee break by a member bringing something up that they weren't aware of. So most companies will do like an account briefing document before the meeting that has a lot of that information in it for the clients who are attending. So we'll review that. We'll also review the facilitation guidelines, as I talked earlier, trying to help people understand some of the tips and tricks and pitfalls to avoid to make sure that you achieve the 80-20 ratio of members doing most of the talking. And then we'll do one final review of all of the content. And at that point, the content should be locked and loaded and really 99% final. And you're just fixing typos at that point. You don't want to be at the dry run and making any major changes. So it takes an incredible amount of planning and prep and people to pull this off successfully. And those were all of my comments. Tatiana, are there more questions?
Yeah, we've been getting a lot of questions. So going back to virtual meeting engagement, a couple of questions there. How do you keep members engaged? And they said, you know, the members are participating, they're committed, but they show up, they don't appear on camera, they're quiet, and we have to continuously call on people to avoid awkward silence. So tips there. And a second parter is specific formats besides the member spotlight. Any others you'd recommend pursuing for that?
For virtuals? Yeah, sure. Excuse me. So everything I talked about, much of what I talked about could still be done virtual. We do virtual breakouts, so you can break them up into teams and send them to different rooms. For example, via Zoom, you can definitely do that. And we've run those very successfully on virtual meetings. I just had a meeting last week with a client who did some design thinking via Mural, the whiteboard collaboration tool, and the members actually loved it. They loved learning the tool. They loved that they could interact in real time with Post-its and provide feedback and vote. So there are different collaboration tools that you can bring in. And as far as keeping, so it is important to introduce or implement some of these different formats to keep the energy level up, because it can't, virtuals are more challenging than an in-person meeting for sure. As far as folks who aren't engaging, when I'm facilitating a virtual, I will keep track of who's talked. And if someone hasn't spoken up, I will call on them and I'll say, Tatiana, what are your thoughts on this? And it can be a little risky because there's always a chance they're multitasking and weren't listening, and so you could catch them off guard. I will actually say in advance, I'll remind people that my role is to make sure that everyone's contributing. And so I might actually start calling on people specifically. So I kind of give them that heads up. But it's fine to call on people. I mean, they've joined this advisory board to provide guidance. They're not spectators. And so it's okay to call on them. And I find almost always, if I call on someone who hasn't been talking, once I call on them, they've got all kinds of things to say about different topics and discussions as the meeting goes on. So sometimes you just need to kind of break the ice for them, and then they will start participating.
Thanks, Nancy. And in that last question, someone highlighted avoiding the need to avoid awkward silence. Definitely a key. Can you just comment on that?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things I always tell the host company attendees is that you have to be comfortable with silence. As I talked about all the prep and planning that we go through leading up to the meeting. And so the host company has seen these questions for 2 months, 1 month, 3 weeks, but they've seen the questions and they've fine-tuned them, and they've thought about what are the best set of questions that I can ask. The members are seeing it for the first time. And not only that, if it's virtual, they need to get themselves off mute. So sometimes what feels like 30 seconds is only 2 or 3 seconds, but there can be that awkward silence for a few seconds while they consider their response. But almost 99% of the time, someone will jump in and say, okay, I'll get the conversation started. Here's what I think. Almost always. What you don't want to do is jump in and ask a different question, rephrase it. Just sit back, be comfortable with the silence, and someone will jump in. If really after 10 seconds, no one has said anything, then I will jump in and say some kind of redirect it, maybe call on someone. It just kind of depends on the dynamics. But a key tip is to be comfortable with a few seconds of silence.
Yeah, that's definitely key. We've got more questions here. One is about how long should the membership be? And then related is how many times should they meet within that membership period? And another related question is just how often should you meet with your CAB? How often should you hold meetings? So membership period and how often to hold meetings.
Okay, so membership term. We recommend 18 to 24 months as the membership term. I really like 18 months because sometimes when you're launching a board for the first time, unfortunately, you're going to most likely end up with a few members who end up not participating. They accept the invitation, they say they're excited, and then for whatever reason, priorities shift and they don't participate. And so if they only have an 18-month term, it gives you a little bit more flexibility at the end of the 18 months rather than waiting 2 years to say, hey, you've fulfilled your membership term, your feedback's been great, but we periodically refresh the membership to ensure membership vitality, and we'd like to give your seat to a different company on the wait list who would like to participate, etc. So 18 months gives you a little bit more flexibility. And by the way, if you have that conversation, it should always be a live conversation and never an email. And then as far as the number of meetings, almost all of our boards meet once in person annually and 2 to 3 times quarterly virtually. And you do want to keep that constant drumbeat and communication and connection with them. If there are opportunities beyond the in-person and the virtuals for a workshop, there might be something that comes out of a meeting that requires drilling down further. Maybe it's if it's an IT topic, maybe there's a new platform and they want to kick the tires on an architecture. That could be an optional workshop for those people who are interested. Some of my clients do a technical roundtable a couple times a year to really drill down into a topic for those who are interested. So it's good to find ways to engage them beyond the meetings, and it might just be a communication from your executive sponsor that says, hey, for our next, it could be like 2 months in advance, hey, for our next virtual, just want to give you a heads up on the topics that we're going to be discussing, just to get them kind of excited about it, but some kind of communication to keep the lines of communication open.
Thanks, Nancy. We have time just for like maybe 1 or 2 questions, but how much do you recommend sharing with members in advance as pre-reads in advance of the meetings?
It's a great question. Pre-reads are great. And if you have something that's relevant to share with them in advance, by all means do so. But just know that not everyone's going to read it. Some people will read it, and members often ask for that. Like, please share pre-reads, relevant information with me in advance, but then they don't all look at it. What is important, though, to share in advance, if you can, are some of the discussion questions, so that going back to what I was saying earlier is, they're seeing the discussion questions for the first time. If you can provide a little bit of context of, we're going to be talking about this particular topic, and here are a few examples of where we'll be looking for your feedback. If you can share that in advance, that's great, because sometimes going back to strategic versus deep dive conversations and the level of conversations, depending on the topic, the member himself, herself may not be the subject matter expert, and they may need or want to reach out to their teams before the meeting to get some additional insight to help them with the discussions. So it's really great if you can provide them a little bit of information about the meeting focus areas in advance.
Thanks, Nancy. Final question, and this we only have a little few. Make it short. It'll be quick.
I'll try, Tatiana.
For in-person meetings, is the expense of travel, hotel covered or not by the host company and cab members? So cost covered.
Great. So all advisory boards cover the hotel, food, and ground transportation, the meeting city. I would say almost every advisory board pays for that. As far as the airfare flights to the meeting city, about half, 50% of my clients pay for that. But it's not expected. You don't have to. I never hear a member say, I'm not coming unless you pay for my airfare. You don't need to bribe them. They should want the agenda. Going back to the whole point of this webinar, your agenda should be compelling enough that they want to come to the meeting, and they don't require that you pay for their airfare.
Awesome. Thanks, Nancy. So quickly to wrap up, we have CAB resources for you. You can schedule a free CAB evaluation within Ignite CAB Expert. We'll discuss your advisory board needs and provide recommendations. And then next month for our CAB workshop, we're going to be talking about CAB meeting facilitation. So join us next month. And thank you everyone for joining. Any final words, Nancy?
No, just thank you so much everyone for joining. I hope this was helpful and appreciate you joining.
Thank you.